Hello everyone and welcome back to your worst nightmare YouTube channel. To help us feel even more connected as a community, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are watching from. If you would like to share some of your horror encounter, do well to email us through the description of this video. Don't forget to smash the like and subscribe button. Thanks. Now, back to today's episode. I had just finished dinner and was settling into my usual routine of checking my messages when my phone rang. It was an unfamiliar number, but I answered it anyway, thinking it might be a potential job offer. My curiosity often gets the best of me, and that evening was no different. "Hello?" I said, trying to sound professional. "Hi, this is Michael from Barden Security," the voice on the other end said. "I'm calling about a potential security system installation. I see you've shown interest in our services." I was surprised. I hadn't contacted Barden Security or expressed interest in their services. But the voice was professional and polite, so I didn't hang up immediately. "I'm sorry, I don't recall inquiring about a security system," I replied. "Could you tell me how you got my number?" "We have access to a public database of people who might need additional security," Michael explained smoothly. "It's part of our outreach program. We're offering free consultations to people in your area." The offer was tempting. I'd recently moved into a new house and had been considering upgrading my home security. It didn't take much convincing for me to agree to a consultation. Michael set up an appointment for the following week and said they would send a technician to evaluate my needs. The day of the consultation arrived, and a man named Tom showed up at my door. He was well-groomed, wore a crisp uniform, and carried a clipboard. He introduced himself as the technician who would be assessing my home. Tom was professional and thorough, walking through every room and taking detailed notes. He asked me a lot of questions about my security concerns, which made me feel a bit uneasy, but I chalked it up to him doing his job. He promised to send a detailed report with recommendations and a quote within a few days. A week passed, and I received an email from Barden Security with the report. It included a detailed quote and several recommendations for improving my home security. I reviewed the document and decided to move forward with their suggestions. The installation was scheduled for the following week. The day of the installation, Tom arrived promptly with his equipment. He was alone this time, which struck me as odd since I had expected a team. But he seemed capable and reassured me that he could handle everything himself. He began installing the security system, and as he worked, we made small talk. He was personable and easy to talk to, which helped me relax a bit. I even offered him coffee, which he declined. About halfway through the installation, Tom mentioned that he needed to step outside to fetch some additional equipment from his van. I watched him leave through the window. As he walked away, I noticed a white van with no company markings parked a few houses down. It struck me as peculiar, but I didn't think much of it at the time. Tom returned with the equipment and continued working. As evening fell, he finished the installation and began packing up. He assured me everything was in working order and gave me a brief tutorial on how to use the new system. He then thanked me and left, promising to follow up in a few days to ensure everything was functioning correctly. That night, as I settled into bed, I felt a sense of security knowing my home was now protected. But my relief was short-lived. Around midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of my phone ringing. I groggily answered it, half expecting a wrong number or a telemarketer. "Hello?" I mumbled. There was a brief pause before the voice on the other end said, "This is Michael from Barden Security. We need to talk." I was confused. "Michael? It's the middle of the night. What's going on?" "There's been a situation," Michael said, his voice tense. "It's about the installation you had done today." I sat up in bed, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" "There's been a mix-up," Michael continued. "Tom, the technician, isn't who he claims to be. We've discovered that he's been using our company's name to gain access to people's homes. My blood ran cold. What? Are you serious? Yes, Michael said urgently. We've had reports of similar incidents. We believe he may be involved in some illegal activities, possibly burglary. We need you to check your security system immediately to make sure it hasn't been tampered with. I hung up and quickly got out of bed. I turned on the lights and went to check the security system. Everything seemed in place, but I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over me. I decided to call the police and report the situation. As I was on the phone with the police, I heard a noise coming from the basement. My heart skipped a beat. I had never been particularly fond of the basement. It was dark, cramped, and filled with old storage boxes. I grabbed a flashlight and cautiously made my way downstairs. The basement was eerily quiet. I shone the flashlight around, trying to find the source of the noise. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The basement door, which I had locked earlier, was now ajar. I pushed the door open and stepped inside, my flashlight casting long shadows on the walls. The noise I had heard was faint, but it was definitely coming from behind a stack of boxes. I approached cautiously and peered around the stack. To my horror, I saw Tom's white van parked in my driveway through the small basement window. I froze, my mind racing. Why was he back here? As I turned to leave, I heard the noise again, this time much closer. It was a scraping sound, as if someone was dragging something across the floor. My flashlight flickered, casting eerie patterns on the walls. I turned it off, trying to listen more carefully. Then I saw him, Tom, crouched behind a stack of boxes, working on something. He hadn't noticed me yet. I wanted to scream, but I forced myself to stay quiet. I slowly backed away and raced up the stairs, slamming the basement door shut behind me. I bolted the lock and called the police again, my hands trembling. The police arrived within minutes. They searched the basement and found Tom still inside, caught in the act of tampering with the security system. He was arrested on the spot, and the officers discovered that he had been using the van to store stolen items from other homes he had targeted. It turned out that Tom had been posing as a security technician to gain access to people's homes, where he would disable existing security systems and steal valuables. The white van parked outside had been used to transport the stolen goods. The company's name had been a cover for his criminal activities. As the police led Tom away in handcuffs, I felt a wave of relief mixed with a deep sense of violation. I couldn't believe that someone I had invited into my home had been plotting such a heinous crime. The shock of it all left me shaken, and I spent the rest of the night unable to sleep, my mind replaying the events in vivid detail. The next day, Barden Security sent a representative to apologize and offer their support. They assured me that they had terminated Tom's employment and would be conducting a thorough review of their hiring procedures to prevent similar incidents in the future. Despite their reassurances, I couldn't shake the feeling of vulnerability that lingered long after the incident. I had trusted someone who had betrayed that trust in the most unsettling way possible. The echoes of that night remained with me, a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest threats come from those we least expect. As for the white van, it was never recovered. It seemed to vanish as mysteriously as it had appeared. And although Tom was in custody, the unsettling thought of him being so close, hidden in the shadows of my own home, continued to haunt me. My name is Jake, and I'm a graphic designer living in a quiet neighborhood. I had been single for a few years after a tough breakup with my ex-girlfriend, Emily. We parted ways on decent terms, or so I thought. One evening, I was working late at my desk when I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find Emily standing there. She looked different, tired and disheveled, but still familiar. Her eyes were filled with a mix of desperation and hope. "Hey, Jake," she said softly. "Can I come in? I need to talk." I hesitated but invited her inside. Emily explained that she had been going through a rough patch and needed a place to stay for a few days. She assured me it was temporary and that she just needed some time to get back on her feet. At first, things seemed normal. Emily was polite and tried to help around the house. But soon, little things started to unsettle me. She would frequently disappear for hours without telling me where she was going. When she was home, she'd often sit in silence, staring at nothing in particular. One night, I woke up to find Emily sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at a photograph of us from our past. She seemed lost in thought, and when I asked if everything was okay, she just muttered that she was fine. Then I noticed something even stranger. Objects in the house started to move on their own. I'd find things out of place, my keys in the fridge, my phone in the bathroom. At first, I thought I was just being forgetful, but it started to feel like someone was deliberately messing with me. Emily's behavior became increasingly erratic. She would lock herself in her room for hours, and when she did come out, she seemed anxious and jittery. I began to worry about her mental state. One day, while she was out, I decided to clean up her room. I stumbled upon a journal hidden under the bed. Inside, Emily had written detailed entries about our past relationship, things that only someone who was obsessively focused on it would know. The entries were filled with anger and regret, and some of them were downright disturbing. I confronted Emily about the journal. She seemed embarrassed and apologized, saying it was just a way for her to process her emotions. She promised she was trying to move on, but the journal left me uneasy. Things took a turn for the worse when I found a series of strange emails in my inbox. They were anonymous but contained detailed accounts of my daily activities. The emails included information about my work schedule, the places I visited, and even the times I was home alone. I felt like I was being watched. I tried to ignore it, but the feeling of paranoia grew. I started to notice that Emily seemed to know more about my life than she should. She would comment on things I hadn't shared with her, and it became clear she was keeping a close eye on me. Then, one night, I came home to find my apartment door slightly ajar. I entered cautiously and found Emily's room empty. Her belongings were gone, and there was a note on her bed. It read, "I'm sorry for everything. I just needed to know if you still cared." The next day, I received a phone call from the police. They informed me that Emily had been found in a nearby park, acting erratically and speaking incoherently. They asked if I could come down to identify her and provide any information that might help. When I arrived at the station, Emily was there, looking even more disheveled and distressed. She apologized profusely for her behavior and explained that she had been struggling with mental health issues. She said she was trying to reconnect with me because she felt lost and didn't know where else to turn. Emily's sudden reappearance and her strange behavior left me shaken. I was relieved to see her getting help, but something still didn't sit right with me. After she was admitted for treatment, I began to piece together what had happened. I learned that Emily had been involved in a series of similar incidents in other places she had lived. She had a pattern of reappearing in people's lives, often after long periods of silence. It turned out that her mental health issues had caused her to fixate on past relationships, trying to find some sort of closure. The final twist came when I discovered that Emily had kept detailed records of every interaction we had during our relationship. She had used this information to manipulate and control our encounters, trying to force a resolution to her unresolved feelings. The whole experience left me with a deep sense of unease. I realized that Emily's behavior was not just a sign of her own struggles, but also a disturbing pattern of obsessive behavior that had impacted more than just our relationship. As I moved on from the ordeal, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been a part of something much darker and more complicated than I had ever imagined. Emily's return had been a haunting reminder of how deeply the past can influence the present, and how dangerous it can be when someone can't let go. I'd always dreamed of owning a cozy little house. When I finally found one that was within my budget, I jumped at the chance. The house was old but had a lot of character. It had been on the market for a while, but I didn't think much of it. The price was right, and I was eager to move in. The first few weeks were uneventful. The house had a quaint charm with its vintage wallpaper and creaky floorboards. There was one thing that caught my attention, though: a locked door in the basement. The real estate agent had mentioned it was just a utility closet, but I couldn't help but wonder what was behind it. I asked the previous owners about it, but they just brushed it off with vague comments about old storage. I shrugged it off and focused on settling into my new home. But the door in the basement was always in the back of my mind. One rainy Saturday, I decided to explore the basement more thoroughly. The basement was dusty and filled with old furniture and boxes. The locked door stood out, and I found myself drawn to it. I tried to pick the lock, but gave up when it proved too stubborn. A few days later, I found a key hidden in an old tin box that had been left behind. It looked old and rusty, and I immediately thought it might fit the basement door. With trembling hands, I inserted the key into the lock. The door creaked open, revealing a small, dark room. The room was empty except for a few dusty boxes and old furniture covered in white sheets. I moved aside the sheets and discovered a collection of old photographs and letters. Most of the photographs were of people I didn't recognize, but one was particularly unsettling: a picture of a woman with a terrified expression. The letters were mostly mundane, but one stood out. It was addressed to someone named Claire and talked about the things we can't forget. As days passed, I couldn't stop thinking about what I had found. I decided to do some research and found out that the house had once belonged to a woman named Claire Bennett. According to local records, she had disappeared over a decade ago under mysterious circumstances. The case had never been solved. I started to feel uneasy. The house, which had felt so inviting, now seemed to have an air of menace. Strange things began to happen. My cat, Felix, would act jittery and hiss at nothing. Objects in the house seemed to move on their own. The basement door would sometimes creak open by itself. One night, I woke up to a loud bang coming from the basement. I went downstairs to find that the basement door was wide open, and the boxes and furniture were scattered around. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of what had happened. Determined to uncover more, I reached out to a local historian who knew about the house's past. She revealed that Claire Bennett had been involved in some sort of dispute with her neighbors and had been known to collect old, valuable items. It was believed she had hidden something important in her house. The historian also mentioned that Claire had been working on a book about her experiences, but it was never published. It seemed like the old photographs and letters in the basement were part of this project. That night, I found another note in the basement room. It was written in the same handwriting as the letter I had previously found. It said, "I'm afraid they're coming for me. Please help." I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I decided to investigate further and started searching through Claire's old papers. I discovered that she had been working on a book about her life and the shady dealings of her neighbors. She had gathered evidence of their illegal activities, but it seemed like she was afraid for her life. I also found a letter addressed to someone named John. In it, Claire mentioned that she had hidden the evidence in a secret compartment in the house and that she had to leave to protect herself. As I read through the documents, I realized that Claire had discovered something dangerous. The neighbors she had been writing about were involved in serious criminal activities, and they might have been behind her disappearance. One night, while going through the remaining boxes in the basement, I heard footsteps coming from upstairs. I was alone in the house. I went up to check and found nothing out of place. But when I returned to the basement, I saw that the boxes had been rearranged again, and the key to the basement door was gone. My heart pounded as I realized someone else was in the house. I checked the house thoroughly but found no one. I decided to call the police and report the strange happenings and the potential link to Claire Bennett's disappearance. The police arrived and started their investigation. They found hidden compartments in the walls and more evidence linking the house to illegal activities. But the most chilling discovery was that the basement door had been rigged with a new lock, which had been installed recently. The final twist came when the police uncovered that the neighbors Claire had been writing about were actually involved in a network of criminals that had been targeting and silencing people who knew too much. Claire's disappearance was part of a larger scheme to eliminate anyone who could expose them. As I packed up my things, preparing to leave the house behind, I felt a sense of dread. The key to the basement had been a gateway to uncovering a dark and dangerous truth. The house, once my dream home, had turned into a nightmare filled with secrets and threats. Now, every time I hear a creak or a thud in the house, I remember the hidden dangers that lurked beneath the surface. The basement, which once seemed like just an old storage room, had been a key to a chilling and very real danger that I had barely escaped. I work in IT, so the closest thing I've ever come to anything spooky is a computer glitch. But when my friend Sarah asked if I wanted to rent her old house, a big, old Victorian in a quiet neighborhood, I said yes. The rent was cheap, and she promised it had character. The house was old but charming. The wooden floors creaked, and the garden was overgrown. Sarah's old furniture was still there, making the place feel both nostalgic and a little eerie. At first, everything was fine. But soon, I started noticing strange things. It began with little noises at night. I'd hear scratching sounds from the walls, like someone was running their nails across them. I thought it was just the house settling, or maybe some critters in the attic. But then, my cat, Whiskers, started acting weird. He would hiss and dart around, especially around the old grandfather clock in the hallway. One evening, I found a note on the kitchen table. It was written in childish handwriting, "Please stop hurting me." I figured it was a prank or something left by Sarah's younger siblings. I threw it away and tried not to think about it. A few weeks later, things got worse. I was working late in the living room when the lights started flickering. I went to check the fuse box in the basement. The basement was dark and damp, and as I fiddled with the fuses, I heard a soft tapping sound. My heart raced as I followed the noise to a door in the corner that was slightly ajar. When I pushed the door open, I saw old junk, rusty tools and dusty furniture. But then I noticed a pile of old newspapers. One headline stood out, "Local boy missing, last seen in suburban home." I took a picture with my phone and decided to look into it. The next day, I went to the library and found out that the boy, Danny Cole, had disappeared over 20 years ago. His case had never been solved. One night, I heard a loud bang from the basement. I went down to check and found that the door was now fully open, revealing a small hidden room. I'd never seen it before. Inside the room were old toys, clothes, and a child's bed with a blanket that had Danny Cole's name on it. I felt sick. I contacted the police, who came and looked around. They confirmed the room was part of the original house, but they didn't find anything that proved it was used for anything bad. Things took a darker turn when a new neighbor moved in next door. His name was Mr. Harris, and he seemed friendly, but there was something off about him. He always seemed to be watching me and often stood by his window, staring in my direction. One day, while I was gardening, Mr. Harris came over. He talked about the history of the neighborhood and mentioned the Cole family. He said they were a nice family. Too bad about what happened to their boy. His words made my skin crawl. That night, I heard the scratching sounds again and found a new note in the kitchen. "They're watching you." I decided to confront Mr. Harris. I knocked on his door, but he didn't answer. I could hear noises from inside, like a child's laughter. I felt a surge of panic and broke into his house. Inside, I found a locked room. I forced the door open and found a room full of surveillance equipment, photos of me and my house, and disturbing videos. The footage showed me in different rooms of the house, captured by hidden cameras. Mr. Harris had been watching me and had a twisted obsession with the cold case. He had set up the house to spy on me and possibly do worse. I immediately called the police, who arrested Mr. Harris. They found more evidence of his creepy behavior, and he was charged with stalking and invasion of privacy. The police also found that the hidden room in my basement wasn't just an old relic, but was part of Mr. Harris's plan. He had been using it to monitor and potentially kidnap children. The discovery was shocking. Danny Cole's disappearance had been part of Mr. Harris's elaborate and disturbing scheme. The room, which I thought was a part of a tragic past, was actually part of Mr. Harris's twisted plans. Now, as I sit in this house that's lost all its charm, I can't shake the feeling that someone, or something, is always watching. The scratching sounds still haunt me, and I can't forget the dark secrets that were hidden right under my nose.